Now we're going to move to our final segment, and that's going to be about metrics for measuring progress in urban resilience through a resilience report card. And I am pleased to be able to introduce my friend Joan Fitzgerald, who is a professor in the School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs at Northeastern University, where I'm happy to serve on her board. Joan is an accomplished author. She's published several books on urban sustainability, including Emerald Cities, her most recent one, and she's working now on a new book called Greenovation. In addition, she has started the Building Resilient Boston Partnership as a project of Northeastern's Resilient Cities Lab. And part of that project is bringing together faculty from 3 colleges to develop metrics for assessing urban resilience. And the team is developing a resilience report card, and we're going to hear about it from Joan now. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to speak at this conference. You might have noticed that there's 2 separate talks listed here. One is the title and one is the abstract, and they're different. And I'd like to say that is not the fault of the conference organizers. I first said I was going to talk about the metrics, then I saw what the other people were presenting and said, no, I should do something else. And so since we have this schizophrenic appointment of both, what I decided to do is talk fast and try to cover both of them. We'll see how I do. You know, no matter what rating system we use, the same cities come up as leaders on climate change. And to give you a short list, in Europe, it's Freiburg, Stockholm, Copenhagen, Malmö, Hamburg. And in the United States, we often hear Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Boston, and Austin. So for the past several years, my work is focused on trying to find out, I would argue that European cities are much more advanced on climate change than in the United States in general. And what I'm interested in finding out is why. What are the specifics, and what can we adapt for replication in the United States? Well, a big part of it to start with is layers of policy. So you have EU policy, you have member state policy that really supports what cities are doing. In the United States, we really don't have much going on at the national level on climate policy, and states vary considerably in what they do. But that isn't everything. And as an urban planner, what I'm really interested in is, do local processes and planning matter? And the answer is, yes, they do. So that's what I'm trying to find out. What can we learn from the planning processes in European cities and adapt here? One of the commonalities of many of the cities that I've mentioned in Europe is that they've developed eco-districts. That is test beds for new technologies, whole areas of a city where they've tried to apply everything they know about climate change and sustainability. You've heard of these places. Vauban in Freiburg, where you just get a sense of it from this photo, where you can see big-time application of photovoltaics on every building. Streets set up to facilitate public transportation, walking, and so forth. An energy policy that focuses on this area having 95% of the energy for this district produced on-site from clean and renewable sources. Here's another picture showing something that might not be so obvious, but an integrated stormwater management system, where you see the, what'd I do? You see, well, the swales at the sides and the gutters, the permeable pavement, and so forth. So the idea was to think of every aspect of sustainability and climate change and to implement it at a district scale and then apply it to the rest of the city. Another one that I've spent a lot of time looking at is Hammarby Sjöstad in Stockholm. And what's interesting about this eco-district, this is a 340-hectare site, brownfield site, was they developed what's called the Hammarby model that you see there. And it's probably difficult to see the specifics, but think closed loop system. The idea here is not just renewable energy, but that all the resources that go in or go out come back in a different form. Energy or something else, recycling. So here again, you see an area redeveloped that incorporates many principles. So here you get a sense of the scale of this, a completely clean brownfield site. And it's an amazing test bed because you're starting from scratch and you can see exactly what the possibilities are, what you can do. So to look at some of the systems, being a coastal city, stormwater management is very important, could integrate a district-level stormwater management system as part of it. This is one of the more fun parts. This is a Swedish company called NVAC. And what you see here with the little boy taking his green cornstarch bag, putting it into one of three receptacles. One is for recyclables, one is for regular trash, and one is for organic waste. Those go through pneumatic tubes underneath the streets. No one comes to collect the garbage, goes to a central processing plant. Well, what happens there? The combustible waste is incinerated and comes back to the district as district energy. There's heat from purified wastewater that also comes back. And compost is produced that's used throughout the city. So through this system, all the waste is somehow reused. Also biogas that fuels the hybrid vehicles that serve the buses that serve the area. So again, I've talked about this in numerous talks. I'm not going to go into detail. It just gives you some sense of the idea. Another one is in Malmö, Sweden, the Western Harbor. This was a shipbuilding area of the city. Shipbuilding went under, and the city decided to develop this as an eco-district, again, to demonstrate what can be done. It was developed in 3 different phases. The idea of integrating public transportation, biking, energy efficiency, and so forth. Another one is the Hafen City in Hamburg, and I won't go into that at all. Christina Hill talked about it in her presentation yesterday. So what we have is tour groups from all over the world going to visit these places and trying to see what they can learn to apply it. Cities in the United States and elsewhere are trying to replicate it. We heard about Boston's eco-district yesterday and the eco-innovation district from Cairo Shen of the BRA. And foundations are very interested in this as well. So yesterday, someone reminded us of following the money. So if foundations are interested in eco-districts and are willing to fund them, you bet cities are interested in eco-districts and implementing them in their cities. One of my concerns in this arena is that eco-districts are being pursued as an end in themselves. And I argue that they are not an end, they are a means to another end. And I think it's a really important distinction to make. So let me stand back a minute and talk a little bit about what is an eco-district anyway. And I would say it's an application of multiple climate change measures and district-level systems at a scale bigger than a building, then smaller than an entire city. It's kind of like bigger than a bread box, smaller than a house. But it's really true. There are some that are just barely beyond the building in scale, and some that take huge districts of a downtown. So the concept covers a lot of territory. The reason I have that question mark with the eco-district is what I've been calling eco-districts in my research for the past 5 or 6 years. I was recently approached by the Funders Network, the Funders Network for Smart Growth and Sustainable Communities and the Urban Sustainability Directors Network to do a scan of district-level sustainability. And the foundations have defined that, in fact, eco-districts are just one type of a broader category called district-level sustainability. So they asked me to do a scan for this in order to figure out what are the best models. Do they incorporate the 3 E's of sustainability? And which cities should be using which kind of district-level sustainability models? So I did this because this fit perfectly with my own research questions. So in what I want to know when I say an eco-district or district-level sustainability is not just an end in itself, we want to know, does it allow the city to incorporate those 3 E's of sustainability more coherently than if you were just working at the city level? The second question I'm interested in is, does it demonstrate the feasibility of technologies and strategies that could allow a city to really ramp up what it's doing in its climate change agenda? And then the third area, does it foster a culture of city planning that, by virtue of everyone looking at all the systems in a district, that facilitates cross-silo planning so that it's not transportation, just looking at transportation, water and sewer, just looking at their aspect of it, but working together in new ways to figure out how to get bigger value out of what they're doing. So with these questions in mind, I started looking, and I was excited to do this because I was already starting to see some of the answers I was interested in happening in the European cities. So for example, Hammarby-Sjöstad gets a lot of publicity, but a lot of those systems don't work maybe as well as promoted. And that's natural. That's the whole idea of experimentation, is finding out what works, what doesn't, how do you improve it. And so what's happening right now is Stockholm is redeveloping its royal seaport, an even bigger area than Hammarby-Sjöstad, working with a bunch of public and private players, as well as the C40 cities in the Clinton Climate Initiative, to try to really do something even more comprehensive than what happened in Hammarby-Sjöstad. So they're completely going for completely fossil-free by 2030, focusing on energy, but also really doing a lot of innovation in smart grid technology. And so the city is trying out all aspects of smart grid technology in this area. The other thing related to that first question I'm asking that I'm seeing in Malmö is one of the problems with these eco-districts is they tend to be islands of green prosperity. They get filled up with upper middle class people and who can afford to live there. And that's really not the goal that we're looking for. And Malmö was aware that this is what happened in their first eco-district, the Western Harbor. And they said, yeah, it's easy to take a completely clean slate and develop it, and rich people will move there. Can we do this in already developed poor neighborhoods? And so they moved to one of the poorest areas, Augustenburg, that had old housing stock that needed to be retrofitted, but also was having severe storm management problems, and totally redid that area. Then they went to Rosengård, which is one of the more problematic neighborhoods in the city, huge immigrant population, high unemployment, and started doing the same kind of retrofits. And in fact, the largest solar array, I believe still in Europe, is on a hospital in that developed area. So starting to learn from those initial experiments and expanding on those. The other thing related to this that they're doing is they're taking in Malmö each of the areas that they're redeveloping and saying, what can we do in that area to become experts in it? And so in Augustenburg, it's green roofs. And so the European Green Roof Center is in this neighborhood. And on all the buildings in these kind of public housing projects, they've got various kinds of green roofs that they're testing to see which are the most effective at different things, growing crops, reducing heat load, et cetera. So how does that apply to the United States? So going back to my district level sustainability scan that I completed, there are in fact many things beyond the eco-district. And they asked us to look at this list on your right. And when we looked at them, discovered that there's different types of district-level sustainability. And so the first one we refer to as certification. And what that means is there is an organization that says, whether it's the U.S. Green Building Council for LEED, the Living Building Challenge, these are organizations that says, you have to do everything on our checklist in order to get certified as a LEED ND neighborhood, Living Building Challenge neighborhood, et cetera. And there's usually a cost associated with it. Except for enterprise green communities, there's a cost associated with it. So that's one type of model. Another one is the defined model framework that says it identifies specific goals, and you need to achieve them in a certain time period. Many of you are probably familiar with Architecture 2030, and Architecture 2030 has created these 2030 districts. And that's the goal, that they have specified goals that they need to reach by 2030. And then there's flexible model frameworks. And that just articulates some principles, but gives those on the ground a considerable amount of flexibility in determining how those get implemented and to what degree. Green zones are one example of that, and one called eco-districts. Now here's where it gets a little confusing. Eco-districts has been a generic word used to describe these district-level sustainability initiatives for a long time. And the Portland Sustainability Institute was one of the first organizations that helped the city do eco-districts, and that was in Portland. They renamed themselves a few years ago as eco-districts, the organization. Some of you might have been to their conferences. So one kind of thinks that, oh, to be an eco-district, you have to be following the principles of this organization. So just a little element of confusion. And then emerging models that just aren't quite so fully defined. So just to present a little bit about these, and I'll give you a quick overview of my assessment of them. I'll have my email address up later. If you want a copy of this report, I'll be happy to send a PDF of it. So LEED ND is the same organization we know that does LEED for buildings, deciding that it is important to move beyond the building. And so taking this area, smart location and linkage, neighborhood pattern and design, and so forth, they have ratings for a neighborhood. My findings on this is that essentially, if you find the right space already existing in a city, there's not much more you have to do to get LEED ND certification. I think it requires one green certified building in it. And so just as we know there are many problems with LEED, although they've gotten us far along in thinking about buildings, there are real limitations to it. And in fact, many cities have gone way beyond LEED in what they're doing. The people in Seattle have a LEED ND district and said there was nothing they did that wasn't already part of their code. So limited in its moving us forward. This is a model, the 2030 district, that I find just fascinating because this is the private sector involving itself. So it's Seattle has the first one. There's others in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, a few other cities. But what's important about this is the private sector. They demarcate a very large area of the downtown, and the building owners say, yes, we are going to commit ourselves to reaching these goals on energy efficiency, water efficiency, and transportation. And so I think as we move forward, it will be a way for cities to really advance their climate action goals by working with the private sector. Eco-districts, there's lots in the report about when, who they benefit, why, the city, how they develop the communities, foundations, et cetera, that you can read. Now, how does that connect to metrics for resilience? Let me just go into that a little bit. This is from Julia Parsons' work, who helped develop the Chicago Climate Action Plan, where there was a concerted effort to look at those areas that connect mitigation, and adaptation. And that's often in the area that we call resiliency. So what my team at Northeastern has set out doing, based on Malmö, created something called the Building Resilient Boston Partnership. In Malmö, what happened is they got all the builders together, along with the developers, to create this living building challenge, to really work, how can we learn from each other, how can we build together to figure out how to do resilience and adaptation and mitigation all together. And so we've created a similar entity with an advisory board consisting of many of the leading developers, some of the construction companies in the Boston area. And one of the people on our advisory committee said, you know, why don't we do a report card to really think about? And Mary Jo was at that meeting, and a report card is something we've done through our Dukakis Center around housing, around other areas, manufacturing, and said, this works. So just quickly to review, what we did was we tried to develop all the areas of resilience. So some around buildings, public health, stormwater management. Then we looked at where is the control, public, structural, and so forth. So structural tools are infrastructure and technology to reduce vulnerability. Then we have planning and regulatory tools to create standards and codes to decrease risk. Response tools minimize the effects of hazards. And market-based tools that provide financial incentives. Step 2 then, you probably can't read this, was to look at, is this public sector, is this state, is this municipal, and then to identify in the Boston area who are all the actors involved. And you can see we're starting to bring together a lot of different actors that somehow have to coordinate. And then in our last step, what we are doing is the action steps. What are the questions we would ask around building resiliency in each of these areas? So we're just getting started with this research. We're not completely funded, but we're starting some of the areas. This is our research team. We have people in various departments around the university in architecture, landscape urbanism, civil and environmental engineering, and our own policy school working on this summer. So in a year from now, I hope to be able to tell you some more results of that work. Thank you.